Hey everyone, Alexander Matthias here from SaxophoneMasterclass.com. In today's video, I want to discuss the 6 most important things that every saxophone player should be working on. Now these 6 topics are what I cover in my new course, 6 Weeks to Saxophone Success, and you can learn more about that by clicking the link in the description, or just go to saxophonemasterclass.com/6 weeks to saxophone success. The 6 topics are tone, technique, scales, embellishments, improvising, and playing by ear. And in this video I'm going to discuss a little bit about what each of those things are and why they're so important. So first of all, we have tone. In my opinion, saxophone tone is everything. If you don't have a good sound, if you don't have a good tone, it's going to be really hard for people to want to listen to you. The mark of a great sax player, in my opinion, is a great sound. And developing a great sound is a lifelong pursuit. But there are things that every sax player should be working on and practicing every day in order to pursue that great sound that every sax player strives for. So it's really important to know how to work on your saxophone sound, and there's many ways to do this. Of course, a lot of it has to do with your embouchure, but it's not the only thing. We have to think about what we're doing with our throat, what we're doing with our chest, what we're doing with our diaphragm, the way we're standing. All of these things have an effect on the sound that we produce. The other thing is knowing what to practice in order to develop your sound. Now in my course 6 Weeks to Saxophone Success, we talk about long tones, we talk about overtones, we talk about mouthpiece and neck exercises, and we talk about all the different ways that you can practice those exercises. Because there isn't just one way to practice long tones, there isn't just one way to practice overtones, there's a variety of approaches. And every sax player should know what those approaches are and practice them regularly. So for example, there's multiple ways to practice long tones. You could practice them quietly, you could practice them loud, you could practice your dynamics going from soft to loud and back down to soft. You can practice tonguing the first note, you can practice not tonguing the first note, you can practice stopping the note with your tongue, you can practice not stopping the note with your tongue. There's all of these approaches, there's all of these ways of practicing these exercises. Again, I go into much more detail inside my 6 Weeks to Saxophone Success course, where I spend an entire week just focusing on tone and tone exercises. The second thing that every sax player should be working on is their technique. Now there's a few different things that come under this category, and one of them is time and rhythm. So I see a lot of sax players practicing their scales, practicing their songs, but I rarely see people focusing in on their time, their rhythm, and making sure they're playing things evenly. So for example, you should be practicing to a metronome. In fact, a great teacher of mine taught me that I should just be putting a metronome on every time I do a practice session. So just leave it on in the background, clicking away, and just practice whatever I'm doing along to the tempo of that metronome. So whether I'm practicing scales, whether I'm practicing songs, whether I'm improvising, just play along to the BPM or beats per minute that you set on your metronome and work on your time. And as you play along to that metronome, you're going to get more and more in sync to it. This really helps with your internal rhythm and your internal time. The other thing you want to be working on is your articulation. So you want to make sure that you're working on different tonguing techniques, you're working on staccato tonguing, legato tonguing, just regular tonguing. You want to make sure that you're practicing these techniques, and you also want to practice in different permutations. So for example, if you're practicing scales, you want to practice tonguing every note, but you also want to practice tonguing every other note. For example, here's playing G major tonguing every note. And now I'm going to practice G major just tonguing every other note. So that's just one example, and you can hear that I was trying to play everything evenly and in time as well. Which brings me to number 3. The third thing that every sax player should be working on is their scales. Scales are the foundation of Western music, so it's going to make it a lot easier when you know your scales to learn new songs and to be able to improvise in music. So every sax player should be practicing their major scales, their minor scales, pentatonic scales, and blues scales at least. Now there's other scales that you should be working on too, but they are some of the most important ones that you should be focusing on, as a lot of Western music is going to be based around those types of scales. So in 6 Weeks to Saxophone Success, I break down all of these scales for you, and I show you how you can apply them to all types of music. You should also be focusing on playing these scales in different ways. So for example, if you're learning G major, yes, you should learn it in 1 octave. But then you should also go beyond that and try to learn it across the whole range of the instrument, like this. So you can hear I played it very evenly and I tongued every note. And again, you should be using a metronome to practice these scales. But I also went beyond the octave. So instead of just going from G up to the next G an octave above, I went all the way up to the high F sharp on the saxophone, which is the highest note that you can play on the saxophone without going into altissimo. And then I went all the way back down to the lowest note that you can play in G major, which is B. And then I went all the way back up to where I started. So this is a really important thing that you should also be working on when you're learning your scales. You should go beyond just playing the scale within one octave. You should go all the way up to the top and the bottom range of the saxophone and go back to where you started. So once you've practiced G major like this, up in the higher range of the instrument and the lower range of the instrument, it's going to be a lot easier to learn songs that maybe call for playing those higher notes or lower notes on the saxophone. So the fourth thing that sax players should be working on is embellishments. So let me give you an example. I'm going to play Mary Had a Little Lamb, very straight, very simple. Okay, so that's playing that song very simple, very straight. Now I'm going to embellish that melody. Okay, so that's a way to embellish a very simple melody. But you can break that down into many different techniques. So for example, I use glissandos, I use falls, I use bends, I use trills, I use turns. I even use a technique of growling, which you can hear a lot, especially in rock music. So practicing these embellishments is really important when you're learning the saxophone, because that's what gives your playing character. And if you want to solo, if you want to play lead melodies, it's really important that you know how to do these techniques. Again, I break down all of these techniques in my course, 6 Weeks to Saxophone Success. And this brings me to the fifth thing that every sax player should work on, and that is improvisation. As a sax player, I would never have a career if I didn't know how to improvise. There's been countless times where I'm playing in a band and the band leader points at me and says, "Take a solo." And I have to know exactly what to do and how to improvise over whatever song they're playing. A lot of times I don't even have the chords and I'm just making it up on the spot. So we're tying in all those things we've been working on, our tone, our technique, our scales and embellishments, and we're putting all of that into practicing our improvising. So a lot of people don't know where to start when it comes to improvising. It can be very confusing and overwhelming, but at the end of the day, you want to get comfortable with making music up on the spot. And a lot of times in the real world, you're only really improvising over very simple chord changes and very simple songs. So again, there's a few scales that you should be working on and practicing so that you can improvise in any musical setting. So a simple example would be, if you're in the key of G major and playing a song in G major, you want to be improvising using the notes of the G major scale. Now there are a couple of other scales that sax players should be working on that will help their improvisation sound more melodic. For example, you want to be working on your pentatonic scales. So if you're in the key of G major, you're going to be playing a G major pentatonic, and that's going to sound a lot more melodic. Here's what G major pentatonic sounds like. So this is a great scale to work on because it's going to be really easy to come up with melodic lines when you're improvising using these 5 notes. So that was just me improvising, playing around those 5 notes. It's a very common scale and it's really ingrained in Western music, so it's almost hard to not come up with something melodic when you're using those 5 notes. Another scale you want to be working on is the blues scale, and learning how to improvise over that and learning how to improvise over the blues. And we go way more in depth on that on the 6 Weeks to Saxophone Success course. So number 6 out of the 6 things that every sax player should be working on is playing by ear. Playing by ear is so important if you want to be able to play along with other musicians, or if you want to learn a song by ear, or if you want to learn a new solo. Learning how to play by ear and understanding how to approach playing by ear is such an important practice. And that's why knowing your scales and knowing how to embellish melodies, knowing how to improvise is so important, because that's going to make it so much easier to learn music by ear. So for example, if you're trying to play along to a song on the radio, it's really important to know what key it's in. And once you know what key it's in, then you can play the scale related to that key. So for example, if the song's in G major, you're going to know that, okay, the notes are in G major. I just have to play the G major scale and I'll figure out by ear what the notes are of the song. It's also good practice to jam along to the song and improvise, so you can work on your improvising as if you're playing along to a live band. You also want to practice learning songs and solos by saxophone players, which again is why it's so important to know how to embellish melodies, because a lot of these sax players, especially professionals, are embellishing melodies all the time. And you want to be figuring out exactly what they're doing and transcribing it by ear. So that's the 6 things that every sax player should be working on, in my opinion. Again, I cover all of this in the 6 weeks to saxophone success. Click the link in the description and you'll get way more details on that. Otherwise, just go to saxophonemasterclass.com/6 weeks to saxophone success. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you got a lot out of it, give it a thumbs up. And don't forget, I put out videos every week on YouTube. If you have any questions, or if there's another saxophone related topic that you want me to cover, let me know in the comment section. Until next time, happy playing.